This is another sign of the times, an analysis and a commentary. Fukushima nuclear crisis was a man-made disaster. The nuclear accident at Fukushima was a preventable disaster rooted in government-industry collusion and the worst conformist conventions of Japanese culture. A parliamentary inquiry has concluded. The report, released by the Fukushima Nuclear Accident Independent Investigation Commission, challenged some of the main storylines that the government and the operator of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant have put forward. Most notably, the report said the plant's crucial cooling systems might have been damaged in the earthquake on March 11, 2011, not only in the ensuing tsunami. That possibility raises serious doubts about the safety of all the quake-prone country's nuclear plants, just as they began to restart after a pause ordered in the wake of the Fukushima crisis. It was a profoundly man-made disaster that could and should have been foreseen and prevented, said the Commission's chairman in the report's introduction, and its effects could have been mitigated by a more effective human response. While assigning widespread blame, the report avoids calling for the censure of specific executives or officials. Some citizens groups have demanded that executives of the plant's operator, the Tokyo Electric Power Company, or TEPCO, be investigated on charges of criminal negligence. The very existence of an independent investigating commission which avoids reliance on self-examination by bureaucracies that might be clouded by self-defense is a break with precedent in Japan, but follows the pattern followed in the United States after major failures involving combinations of private companies, government oversight, and technology issues. Those cases which were cited by the panel include the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident in 1979, the Columbia and Challenger space shuttle disasters in 1986 and 2003, and the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001. The 641-page report criticized TEPCO as being too quick to dismiss earthquake damage as a cause of the fuel meltdowns at 3 of the plant's 6 reactors, which overheated when the site lost power. TEPCO has contended that the plant withstood the earthquake that rocked eastern Japan, instead placing blame for the disaster on what some experts have called a once-in-a-millennium tsunami that followed. Such a rare calamity was beyond the scope of contingency planning, TEPCO executives have suggested, and was unlikely to pose a threat to Japan's other nuclear reactors in the foreseeable future. The parliamentary report, based on more than 900 hours of hearings and interviews with 1,167 people, suggests that reactor number 1 in particular might have suffered earthquake damage, including the possibility that pipes burst from the shaking, leading to a loss of coolant even before the tsunami hit the plant about 30 minutes after the initial earthquake. It emphasized that a full assessment would require better access to the inner workings of the reactors, which may not be possible for years. However, the report said it is impossible to limit the direct cause of the accident to the tsunami without substantive evidence. The Commission believes that this is an attempt to avoid responsibility by putting all the blame on the unexpected, the tsunami, the report continued, adding, and not on the more foreseeable quake. The report, submitted to Parliament on Thursday, also contradicted accounts put forward by previous investigations had described the Prime Minister at the time as a decisive leader who ordered TEPCO not to abandon the plant as it spiraled out of control. There is no evidence that the operator planned to withdraw all its employees from the plant, the report said, and meddling from the Prime Minister, including his visit to the plant a day after the accident, confused the initial response. Instead, the report by the Commission, which heard testimony from the Prime Minister and a former TEPCO president, described a breakdown in communications between the Prime Minister's office and TEPCO, blaming both sides. The Prime Minister made his way to the site to direct the workers who were dealing with the damaged core, the report said, an action that diverted the attention and time of the on-site operational staff and confused the line of command. The report faulted the former TEPCO president for an inability to clearly report to the Prime Minister's office the intentions of the operators, which deepened the government's misunderstanding and mistrust of TEPCO's response. The Commission also accused the government, TEPCO, and nuclear regulators of failing to carry out basic safety measures despite being aware of the risk posed by earthquakes, tsunamis, and other events that might cut off power systems. Even though the government-appointed Nuclear Safety Commission revised earthquake resistance standards in 2006 and ordered nuclear operators around the country to inspect the reactors, for example, TEPCO did not carry out any checks and regulators did not follow up, the report said. The report placed blame for the tepid response on collusion between the company, the government, and regulators, saying they had all betrayed the nation's right to safety from nuclear accidents. TEPCO manipulated its cozy relationship with regulators to take the teeth out of regulations, the report said. The report reserved its most damning language for its criticism of a culture in Japan that suppresses dissent and outside opinion, which might have prompted changes to the country's lax nuclear controls. What must be admitted, very painfully, is that this was a disaster made in Japan. Its fundamental causes are to be found in the ingrained conventions of Japanese culture: reflexive obedience, reluctance to question authority, devotion to sticking with the program, groupism, and insularity. This report tries to shed light on Japan's wider structural problems, on the pus that pervades Japanese society. This report contains hints on how Japanese society needs to change. Yes, everything that must change, quickly or rapidly, and for the better, because it's about what kind of world are we leaving to the future generations, and that should be a very important question to ask. This, too, is another sign of the end of times as we know them, transition days, which is a time of extraordinary happenings, events, and changes. It's time for the spiritual and physical manifestation of the book of Revelation. Revelation, chapter 8, verse 10. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers, and upon the fountains of waters. 11. And the name of the star is called Wormwood, and the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many humans died of the waters, because they were made bitter. 12. And the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars, so as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. 13. And I beheld, and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, 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 to the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the 3 angels, which are yet to sound. And all these are more signs.